I love the premise of the quiet invasion. It's a style of narrative conflict that rejects the loud, immense spectacle of the typical invasion trope and instead sees the invasion gradually occur in the background, unbeknownst to the characters, and before anyone with the power to stop it notices, it's already too late. And no story perfectly demonstrates this unknowing horror better than the Body Snatchers. This science fiction novel written by Jack Finney in 1955 has been adapted multiple times, whether directly or spiritually. Like I said in my history of the spider genre, the 50s was rampant with monster movies that played on the fears of Cold War politics and nuclear warfare, but Body Snatchers was on its own unique social paranoia craze of taking the generic alien invasion narrative and subverting it into something covert and mysterious. The Body Snatchers tells the story of seeds that arrive on Earth which grow into pods that duplicate the appearance of a sleeping human host, including their memories and knowledge, and when fully transformed, their host disappears. Now, obviously that doesn't sound as scary as the Adaptations, which go as far as to assimilate their hosts, who gradually decompose into nothing as they're consumed. As you'll see, the Adaptations take a bleaker approach to the source material. At least in the original book, the aliens decide to leave Earth after being met with heavy resistance, but the general premise of overtaking mankind until they eventually leave a dead planet and move on to kill the next ecosystem remains largely intact. The thing is, I'd argue that some of the adaptations are actually better than the book, because of their expansions on the original concept and themes. The core theme of the book was the pressures of conformity. Once these creatures begin to take over, they all have the same qualities as their human counterpart, except lack any feeling or emotion, leaving them as these hollow shells just going about their mundane, everyday lives without much ambition, thought, or concern, regimented into thankless routines they can't escape from. Kinda like what normal life is anyway, so not much has changed. It calls upon the idea of what makes us human and that freedom of being human. While they look like us, they aren't us, and so the fight back is characterized by the personalities and emotions of the characters who won't accept being taken over, even if it does expose how oppressed they really feel. You could look at it from a Marxist or communist point of view, but broadly speaking, I like how it's handled as a sort of existential questioning of what the point and purpose of our humanity really is when, outside the realm of consciousness, our lives aren't all that meaningful to begin with. This idea is approached very differently in each adaptation, and probably handled best in the 1978 version, but given it's my personal favourite adaptation of the story, we'll come to that one at the end. Something that the 2007 version, The Invasion, tried to do was approach humanity from a more, cynical perspective. Once the aliens begin taking over, violence and hate begin to dissipate, making for a somewhat better humanity, and so, once a cure is finally discovered, all the hate and violence just reignites again, leaving us to ponder over whether our humanity was even worth saving. Or something like that. The Invasion was one of those films that tried to claim originality by changing enough of the source material so they don't get sued, but I see it as this ironically failed assimilation of the original story with patronizing subtext that basically says, humans are a bit shit, aren't they? The first adaptation in 1956 takes the more straightforward approach, focusing more on the broad social tension and paranoia of outsiders and penetrating the safety of the traditional domestic lifestyle. It's absolutely worth a watch for its simple execution and compelling central performance by Kevin McCarthy, yet the key thing about this adaptation is that we can't overlook how its ending essentially set the framework for later adaptations, presenting the narrative as simply the beginning of a large-scale invasion that's potentially too late to control. It's not a nihilistic film by any means, but it's a good example of science fiction's push towards more intimate realism during the 50s and 60s, thanks in part to the narrative being framed as a dubious flashback during a police investigation. It throws a shred of doubt at such extraordinary circumstances by completely flipping McCarthy's calm and composed character into a raging lunatic, making us question the validity of the story until the very final moments. The 1993 version, on the other hand, leaned heavier on the subtext, without the condescending attitude of the 2007 film. Instead of a small-town invasion, the narrative was restricted to an army base, which right away established the central theme of conformity in a setting where emotions are already frowned upon as a lack of discipline, making it harder to decipher who's a pod person and who isn't. While it scraps many characters and elements from the original, it's one of those adaptations where many people think its changes are purely cosmetic or for modernized purposes, but it actually takes many of its original elements from the 1978 film, so I think at this point I've hyped it enough that we should probably talk about it. If there is one film that truly competes with John Carpenter's The Thing in terms of paranoid, hair-raising who is who, what the hell is going on shenanigans, it's Philip Kaufman's version of the invasion of the Body Snatchers. This film does take many liberties in how it presents the original story, to the point of being borderline meta to a certain degree. On the one hand, it seems to portray the events of the 1956 film as having already occurred, given Kevin McCarthy cameos as an unknown character, echoing the original conclusion by screaming how the invasion is already happening and "you're next" before, in a grim twist, mysteriously dying around the corner. But on the other, it's the very unorthodox and uncanny atmosphere that really drives the tension. It goes beyond merely being eerie and begins to feel genuinely surreal at times. There is a deadpan sense of humour to it, but from the very beginning it feels oppressive and unnatural. There's such a palpable escalation to danger, but it's never exactly clear where that danger is coming from. The paranoia is never direct. It relies on you instinctually feeling that something isn't right. Of course, it's obvious to anyone who knows the plot, yet even in the presence of the protagonists, they're presented as uncharacteristic to the typical charismatic heroes in a Hollywood film. For the most part, the characters are relatively modest and introverted, making for socially awkward interactions that subvert the articulate interactions most films usually have. Conversations feel real and unrehearsed. Sometimes they speak over each other or take long pauses between sentences because neither of them knows how to respond, and as a result, that quiet invasion becomes accompanied literally by quiet character development that makes it impossible to tell them apart from the pod people, which becomes a significant plot point at the end. Going back to that sense of uncanny, the film establishes this instantly. The camera shows us the pod plants have landed innocuously and blended in with the ecosystem, then the camera pans and zooms into this random priest on the swing, contrasting with the children in the park, creating a genuinely uneasy image. Even if he's not a pod person, it already insinuates a stranger danger premise, given how priests and children don't usually go well together. It's Michael Chapman's cinematography that truly defines the tension. There's something almost pseudo-documentary about it, a sense of cinema verite, a raw, observant feel that perpetuates our everyday reality becoming intruded by something unfathomable. As far as alien invasions go, this one creates a flare of authenticity, and the subsequent science fiction appears even more horrific and grisly when it's thrown out of left field. It's the subjective camera work that stops scenes ever feeling relaxed, in how the camera zooms and follows characters almost voyeuristically. The paranoia comes from the feeling of always being watched, which is only reinforced when background extras literally begin staring at the characters. That's part of its seemingly meta nature. Sometimes I can't help but feel like the film broke the fourth wall by calling attention to its cinematic artifice to heighten the growing sense of unfamiliarity with the world, where its central characters are the ones out of place. Everything feels disorientating. Kaufman doesn't just make you feel scared or paranoid, he makes you feel small and overwhelmed. It makes the ordinary seem unreal, and the unreal seem believable. Interestingly, in M. Keith Brooks' Alternate Americas science fiction film and American culture, he described it as practically being a conspiracy thriller, given how there is virtually no supernatural or extraterrestrial qualities until later in the film. Extracting the title, it really is a massive what the hell is going on. Maybe it is a government hoax or underground criminal conspiracy. You are completely left in the dark most of the time along with the protagonists. However, if we're to conclude with Kaufman's own original ending, it says a lot for the kind of unique horror Body Snatchers encapsulates. When the world is eventually taken over, the alien hosts just go back to the boring mundane tasks that humans get up to. So like I said earlier, it's as if nothing ever changed. The victims don't suffer because it gets them at their most vulnerable and unaware. I guess by the end, Donald Sutherland's character, being the last consciously aware human, has no choice but to embrace the alien's symbolically inevitable change, even if conformity lives on, along with the agonizing, harrowing screams of a race of creatures that simply prospered on another planet, not to antagonize or hurt, but simply survive, much like us. Hi everyone, thank you so much for watching. Let me know in the comments below what your favourite alien invasion movie is. If you enjoy what I do here and you want to support the channel at all, you want to get early access, you want to get your name in the credits, you can do so by heading over to Patreon and supporting me there. And until next time, go follow me on Instagram and on Twitter, and stay safe. And I'll see you all very soon for the Christmas season. Bye!